Hello, St. Matthew's United Methodist Church and the rest of our community who's joining us online. I'm Pastor Kelly.
And I'm Pastor Dave.
And welcome to this week's episode on Advent and comfort and Isaiah. See, Dave laughed at that one.
Yep.
Finally got an intro that was comical. So yes, we are first week of Advent. First week of Advent. Dave has started a new sermon series. I just got to tell everybody, maybe I'll find a way to add these into something, but, Dave picked like the coolest graphics. Like he was like, Kelly, what do you think of this? I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Like, I love these. I love the graphics you picked and kind of like the templates for.
I didn't pick them. I created them.
Fair. I was probably should have been more excited about other things, but I was very much like, oh my gosh, this is great.
I love doing the graphics. I love doing that.
Yeah, it's super cool. But yeah, so you came out of Isaiah 40 verses 1 through 11.
Yes.
Without like too much context here, but I think Advent's a really important part of this season that we're entering into. And Dave was like, well, duh, because it's Advent. And I was like, but Dave, not all of us grew up in this wonderful, households and faith communities where people like taught me about Advent, because I never grew up understanding what Advent was. I was like, when's Santa going to get here? I think, as we talk a little bit more today about your sermon and kind of the context of what's happening in Isaiah, what Advent is, what this week of Advent kind of represents, right? But at the same time, I think that there's a message in there that is not only really applicable to like my own life, but I think as I've kind of looked at everything that's kind of happening in our community, our culture, and like kind of worldwide, it's like, I think there's some nuggets of wisdom there into like what Advent's trying to communicate that would be beneficial for us that we benefit from. So without further ado, context
of Advent or
sermon. So you were Isaiah 40 verses 1 through 11, which are.
So Isaiah is writing to history first. The Israel under King David was the first time they came together to become one unified kingdom, monarchy. Just after David, Solomon took over the kingdom, the unified kingdom, and then it broke apart. Broke apart into northern kingdom, southern kingdoms. Northern kingdom was called Israel. Southern kingdom was called Judah. Both of those kingdoms were conquered at different times. The southern kingdom was conquered by the empire of the Babylonian Empire. And in that time, of course, the Babylonians took a good number of people out of Judah, out of Israel, back to Babylon. And it's to those exiles that Isaiah is writing. This just trying to put yourself into that space, you can kind of see how horrific kind of a situation it was. They were taken, they were forced to live among the Babylonians, and all of that was part of that. And the exile lasted, I don't know, something close to 60 years.
It's a common theme. Exile.
Well, if you're dealing with the prophets, you're dealing with exile,
right?
A fair amount of time. So Isaiah was writing to these people who had been exiled, these leaders of Judah, Israel, who have been taken away from their land, away from their family, away from their country, put into forced to live in a foreign place,
right?
Under duress. And so Isaiah chooses, which is different from some of the other prophets. Some of the other prophets were writing, "See, you sinned, and this is just punishment for your sins and for all this other kind of stuff." But Isaiah doesn't say that. Isaiah in chapter 40 speaks words of comfort to these exiles as they live in this other land. The passage begins, comfort, oh, comfort my people. And then goes on to describe, how God has wrapped all of God's children in the arms, just like a shepherd caring for their sheep,
Right.
or a lamb cared for by the mother sheep. So it's very comforting, these words. It's comfort, and he goes on to say, this is you're connected to God. You're one of God's people, one of God's children, and you are worthy of that love. To comfort them. And it's interesting that Isaiah is not saying, you should get even, or you should be mad, or you should be upset. It's just reminding them that they belong to God, and that God is still working on their behalf. And it's meant to be very comforting to these people.
Right.
Yeah, and just thinking about how we would react today, we would react with, anger and finger pointing, and maybe even revenge, and all of those kind of things, all of that kind of stuff. But Isaiah is really about comforting these exiles.
I love too that, as we read the prophets, especially in Isaiah 2, there's some good, support for coloring in the picture of some of the things that have led people into exile in Isaiah, like why they're there and what has happened to them to kind of get them into that place. And so one of the things I love about how you're talking about comfort, and that Isaiah is highlighting comfort, right? And this character trait of God, and what God is actually up to, and what God is providing for them, and what God is trying to accomplish is this comfort, and that they're loved, and that they matter, and that, this outside circumstance or reflection of what's happening around them isn't necessarily the only defining factor of what's currently going on. And I think that's not only is that a really wholesome and helpful message, but it's when I think about the backdrop of culture, my context, right? I think it's one that's all too often forgotten. It's not something we focus on, or we're encouraged to focus on, if you will, right? A lot of the mechanisms and narratives that I come in contact with a lot are not ones of comfort, or that God is up to things that are positive and good, and working towards a really good thing. It's the opposite. It's fear, it's anxiety, it's all the other things. And so I love that you highlighted that. So why don't you talk a little bit about Advent? Don't go into all the other weeks, right? But kind of what Advent is, and then lead into week 1.
Okay.
Kind of what the conversation is there.
Advent is a season that falls just before Christmas. So it's the 4 weeks before, the 4 Sundays before Christmas, is the season that we call Advent. And it is a season of preparation. So we're preparing for the coming of the Christ child. It's a time when we, in the real world, we're preparing our putting up the lights, the Christmas lights, we're putting up the tree, we're doing all these things to prepare. In the church, in the season of Advent, we're still preparing for Christ, but we're doing it in a different way. Right. We have the Advent wreath, we light candles, we talk about the things that the prophets, talked about before Jesus was born.
Right.
What kind of hopes, what kind of dreams did Israel have? What kind of things that the prophets talk about in looking toward the future for this nation of, faithful nation that they were a part of, those communities of faith. And so we kind of realize that Christmas is coming, and that there's something for us to get ready for. And in order to do that, we look at the expectations, before Jesus was born, and we do that through the prophets, mainly in the season of Advent. So preparation, getting ready, and then all of the things that we can do to make ourselves ready for the coming of Christ at that time, and then the coming of Christ today, even in our lives. Right.
I love it. And I think too, something's really fascinating about the concept of Jesus and the person of Jesus and baby Jesus being born, and having been promised is, we're so far removed from the event and the history and all the things that were happening. I mean, there's thousands of years, right? But there were people who lived and died hoping for the Messiah and hadn't happened yet, right? And, I think one of the things that's really cool about the Christian calendar, right? We've talked about calendars before in this podcast, is not necessarily the discipline of it, but the posture of like preparing and getting ready to the best way we can to experience like the weight of that promise and the expectation, the hopeful expectation that the Messiah is coming. Because we kind of have some of those chapters already filled in, right? Of like, oh yeah, Jesus was born. Cool. Yeah, great. But to take a second, right, to prepare and to hold that anticipation. For me, I think it's where there's almost like a direct kind of correlation is, I'm not waiting for Jesus to be born, but there are times in my life where I'm waiting for God to do something, and I am hopeful and expectant that it's going to happen. But I have to exercise this understanding and this posture that like, well, it's not yet. And I think that's kind of like, as we're now in, Christendom, right? Like Christianity is a thing, and Jesus has been born, and, fast forwarding a little bit, Jesus dies and then raises from the dead. But there's a direct correlation to I think the life of the Christian and how we relate to this season is, I don't know. I'm not trying to speak for y'all who are watching and listening, or I'm not trying to speak for you, Dave, but definitely thinking about even my year of like, what were my hopes and my dreams and the things that I was expecting and wanting God to do that happened. Wonderful. And what are the things that I'm still waiting on God to accomplish and do? And, I love that you're pulling from Isaiah because, Jesus was promised for a long time and people were waiting and waiting and waiting. And, and we can forget that because it's, not only do we live in a culture that's like immediate gratification, we get whatever we want when we want, and we have access to everything. Even now, right? Like we don't wait on a lot of things anymore.
We have Uber and DoorDash and Amazon Prime.
When I was a kid, by the way, you didn't summon strangers from the internet and get in their cars. Like Amazon gets me what I want. Like I literally won't even wait 2 days for Amazon shipping. I'll look for the thing that's going to be there at like 5 to 10 p.m. tonight. I got to add $10 to this purchase. Okay, cool. What's available? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no patience. But yeah, like, so Advent is this time to like stop for a second, slow down and go, okay, well, what are we waiting on?
Yeah. You mentioned it's a season of not yet. It's the kind of one description of Advent is now and not yet.
Love that.
It's the recognition that Christ is with us. Christ has been born. Christ has begun his work, but that work is not completed yet. So Christ is both with us, and we celebrate the work of Christ in the world, but then we realize that it's not yet brought to completion. And so there's still this brokenness. There's still this stuff that we are waiting on, that we are expectant. And so this season helps us with that too.
Right. Right. Something that I love about, bringing it back to calendars and patterns. And, I joke like I'm a, well, not as young anymore, but I'm like a young kid with an old soul. Like, I just love the idea, like, the Jewish feasts and holidays and how they would have these like celebrations of remembrance, right? Like, so they would throw these shindigs or observe something that like when God did something really cool, even if they were hundreds of years removed from that event, they would still like remember it and have this posture of like celebrating it. And I think this is one of the times. There's other times during the year that as Christians we get to do that as well. But Advent is one of those seasons, right? Where, to your point, we know that Jesus came and is at work, and it's that now and not yet type of posture and mentality, but this is also an opportunity to observe something that we weren't like there for and remember. And I think if we allow it to, it can be a really positive, wholesome, good thing that is good for our souls. It's good for our relationship with God. And then, you know, ex facto, it's good for the people that are around us. So comfort was the theme of your sermon for today. And why don't you talk a little bit about, I mean, and if the answer is easy and it's like, that's just the first week of Advent, but you know, we've been talking a little bit more at length about our people and the people we're coming in contact with. And I don't know why, like some years I'm like, okay, comfort, great. Like that's great. And we need that. But I'm also like, maybe we don't need it as much as, you know, but this year I feel like there's like a big need for people to like be able to like hear the words of Isaiah and that like the thing you're communicating right now. And I'm like, man, I need that too.
Well, you know, when everything's going great and it's been a great year, I mean, you're fine, right? It's when everything goes wrong and when you're coming out of a pandemic and when the economy is hurting and all of these, you know, when the things are going bad, you need those words of comfort. That's exactly right.
Right.
And so while the passage, I chose this passage because it was a passage that John the Baptist quoted when he was expecting Jesus and trying to talk about Jesus and the coming of the Messiah. And he quoted this passage and said, you know, it's going to be the roads are going to be made straight and level and easy to travel, and it's upon those roads that Christ will come. And the exiles heard that. They heard that they were going to have an easy way back to Israel, that they were going to be led back, that the road was going to be made easy for them and be made possible for them. And so it lets us know that Christ somehow makes that possible for us as we kind of look forward to John the Baptist and what he was talking about in using this verse and kind of comparing it with the exiles and with the reality of Christ actually coming into the world. So there's that connection as well. So I chose this passage because of the connection with John the Baptist. It is a traditional Advent reading, but as far as designated kind of themes for each of the four Sundays in Advent, there's not so, you know, we're not so rigid on those things.
Yeah.
Some people have heard of, you know, the 4 Sundays in Advent are for peace, hope, love, and joy, which were actually created by a greeting card company kind of thing.
It sounds very greeting cardy.
Yeah, it does. You know, and some people have latched onto them, and those are great themes. But if you look at the traditional passages, they're not directly tied, you know, to the passages. So what I've done is more taken the passages and pulled out themes that I think are relevant for us today.
Right. Yeah. So something that I love about the concept of comfort, right, is, you know, I grew up, you know, my story, right, is, you know, Christmas season was, you know, you put a smile on even if you weren't happy. Like, because the expectation is like, well, Jesus is born, so be happy about it.
And everybody's happy.
And everybody's happy because Christmas is great. And, you know, and, you know, then, you know, presents and the things and the food and family. And I'm not poo-pooing on any of that. I mean, I am literally like the annoying Christmas guy. Like I'm playing Christmas music in July. Like I'm that guy. Like you know, forget Halloween, forget Thanksgiving. I don't care. Like put a tree up. Like we're doing it, right? Like all the traditions, all the food, all the family stuff, all the goofy, quirky, fun stuff. If you took like a greeting card company and a Hallmark movie, see what I did there? And you mash them together, you get me. Like that's Christmas for me.
Well, and Christmas is the coming of God into the world.
Yes.
God, you know, in the person of Jesus Christ, coming to be with us, and that's worth every bit of celebration that we can
100%.
put around it. But Advent is important too.
And I think that for me, when we're talking about the concept of comfort and the verses you're using and this series we're doing and preparing, I love that you brought up John the Baptist, right? Because preparing the way, right? Like that anticipation is even in like holding all those things and them being true is like, the birth of Christ, and remembering that like my salvation rests in Jesus, and that like the way was made easy for me to get back to God and be with God, and like not just in that moment, but now forevermore, right? Like, and that's all wonderful and great. And I like this season helps me kind of like intentionally like think about that in ways that like other cultural seasons don't kind of push us in that direction. Sure. But I think at the same time, what's so brilliant about what kind of how you layered this here, but is that we're humans and we're complicated. Life is complicated. There's people even in the story of this that are like living in different places and dealing with different things. And, the holiday season, I can sit here and be super excited about Jesus, and I can also be remembering people I miss. And it can be a time of grief. It can be a time of bittersweet where, you get a smell of something, or you have like you're unpacking a box and you find a decoration that somebody gave you that's not with you anymore. And like maybe this is the first season or the first Christmas holiday where you're waiting on the birth of Christ and to celebrate that. And that person who is like a pivotal person for you is not here. Like this side at least. And so there's, like we're saying, like there's these different places we live in. And our lives take us in different times and different seasons. And I think that it's important that we also remember when we talk about comfort, you can be seeking comfort when life is great and everything is going your way, when the road is flat and easy. And you can also be needing and seeking out comfort when maybe it's a little bit more rocky than I wanted it to be, or a season of joy and expectant hope is a little bit harder than it was the year before. Or maybe this season for an individual is always hard. And that's not exclusatory to any of this, right? And like that's why I love that you're talking about comfort, because I think, maybe it's my ADD, Dave, but like setting the expectations and like having a clear cut, like, okay, what are we doing, right? Like starting with comfort, I think is a brilliant way to kind of walk into Advent.
Well, it also speaks to, all of the stuff that we get bombarded with, all of the bad news that's in the world, and as people who follow Christ, and, we can start to think, well, isn't this stuff being handled? Isn't Jesus on the job? Hasn't Jesus come to kind of put the world in order and, on the earth as it is in heaven? Is that not the case? Or are we mistaken? And this season then helps us to remember that, yes, that is the case, that Christ is come to bring a new order, that the kingdom is a different way of living, and that in that kingdom all things will be made new. And Christ begun that work. He began that work 2,000 years ago, but it's not complete. And so we still have brokenness. And this season, I think, is made for the brokenhearted. Those people who want those things to be made well and to be healed and to be as God desires them. So this is the season that's kind of made for us to say, it's coming. And we can find comfort in those words. And knowing that we have not been abandoned in this time.
Yeah, I think that's where we relate, right? Is, hope doesn't disappoint because it ends up being fulfilled at some point, right? And like that was the dig I took before it. Like, all right, God, Messiah's coming when? If you want to like, it's pretty bad down here. It's pretty bad around here. Like, are we gonna? Messiah's coming, right? Like it's going to get fixed, right? And not to fast forward through the rest of the Gospels, because I'm sure we've all read them. But even like John the Baptist and like a page or two is like, hey, what the heck, man?
You brood of vipers.
I'm in jail. Like, what's going on? I'm going to lose my head. And so it's this concept, right? Of, people were waiting on God to move in this powerful way, and God promised to do it. And then it happens. That's why I love Zechariah, and I love, the babies in the wombs. And like so much about the Christmas story, right? And Advent, like this time of year, right? It's not like I forget all the time because it's like it happened. And now I'm waiting on Jesus to do the next part of the plan, right? Not this instrumental part, right? But like I forget that people were waiting. And we're just, and later, we'll get to the wise men, and we'll more of the story of like, wait, the Messiah is born, so we're gonna go thousands of miles to go see him, or however. Like, I mean, just people do like ridiculous stuff because Jesus is born. They got to go see him, and it's like the hope of man, the promise of God has been fulfilled, and like the Messiah, the baby's here, and it's this just it changes everything. And I think like I sometimes forget what it was like before. I didn't have to wait on baby Jesus to be born. I've inherited that Jesus, that's already a truth. But again, like I said, that core, that connection is, where in my life am I waiting for like Jesus to do the things that I know Jesus does? And sometimes I forget that, like, am I waiting? Am I hopeful in this? Am I praying for this? Am I looking at this? Am I a part of all that? Or am I like pretending like I'm fine? What do we call it? We call it active hope. We call it active waiting, right? Like but yeah, this is that season where that fulfillment happens. That promise is fulfilled. Yeah. It comes true. And it's just this earth-shattering thing. And it's really awesome, and it's wonderful, and it's great. And I guess my final point here would be, like, I need that reminder, I think, more than like one season a year. Better if I could practice. I mean, we can't do Advent every week, but but just that anticipation of like, oh yeah, God follows through always. And what an opportunity to take 4 weeks in preparation of his monumental birth, to remember that, oh yeah, God's a God who follows through.
Yeah. And if we can see how God followed through for those people at that time, gives us some comfort and some hope that God can break through even the stuff that we see and that we experience. And then that prepares us for Christmas morning and all of the joy that we will experience then. And then also this season is for those people who are mourning a loss or for some reason can't get into the Christmas spirit. This season kind of helps can help them as well deal with that loss in the midst of whatever it is that they're dealing with.
I said final thought. Want to add one more thing? I gotta.
A final thought.
Yeah, final. One more thing. No, but like you're talking about comfort, and I love that part of Isaiah because it's an active comfort from God. God hasn't abandoned them and left them alone. So if you're in a season right now, right, where it's hard and it's tough, understand that like, God is actively trying to comfort you and to be with you. It doesn't always make things easy or fun or less painful, but we're not alone in that. You are not alone in that. God is actively with you and is loving you and is trying to provide you comfort. And then it's, as believers, right? Like that's why the community is so important. We are to comfort God is comforting us, and in that as well, like we are called to comfort one another. That's the full expression of God's love, is God wants to involve us in that. And so, my encouragement to those of you who are watching and listening is, in whatever capacity you can, if you're a person who needs comfort, reach out. Our emails are and the website will be in the description below. And, please reach out to us in contact. If this is a season that's hard and you need comfort, good news. I know quite a few people who would love to comfort you and have you participate in the life of St. Matthew's UMC. But also that if you are a person who like this is a season where, you're giddy and you're ecstatic and it's wonderful and you're in like the road is completely straight and, like level. maybe also seek out some opportunities to be comfort and ask questions and try to be intentional with the people around you who might also need some of that support.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, this is a season where we can come together. It's kind of built for us to come together. The traditions are there for us to come together and to be together and to experience the joy together and fight through whatever the issues that we have together as well. And so I hope that you will observe this season for what it is. Try not to jump too far ahead, but exist here and receive the comfort that comes from Isaiah and that this season is really built around.
Amen, brother.
Amen.
I'm Pastor Kelly.
And I'm Pastor Dave.
And we'll see you next week for Advent Week 2. Bye.
Bye-bye.